Still rocking after all these years.
This is the story of my rock and roll butler.
This is it, the show that started it all. Often imitated, but never equal. From San Francisco, USA, online since 2004. It's the one and only Rock and Roll Geek Show. With the original rock and roll geek, Michael Butler.
Welcome to the Rock and Roll Geek Show. My name's Michael Butler. Thanks a lot for joining me. I really appreciate it. Today is Thursday, February 8th, 2018, and it is 9:15 p.m. when I'm recording this episode. Actually, I'm just recording the show open. I just got off the phone with John Speck from the Fags. I don't know if you listened to my top 10, give or take 4 albums episode a couple episodes ago, but I did my top 10 albums of 2017, and the Fags was tied at number 9 or 8 or number 1. They were in my top 10. I am a huge fan of the Fags, and John Speck is a great songwriter, and we had a 2-hour talk tonight. We recorded an episode, and we talked about the Fag. It's a nice lesson for people who want to get into the music business. This was back in the days when record labels were doing bidding wars, and it's a good story. John Speck has been through the mill, and he tells all about it on this episode of the Rock and Roll Geek Show. He was in a band that was on RCA Records called Horse. They got signed and dropped. Then the Fags there was a bidding war on the Fags and on Horse. Great story, friends. I cannot get enough stories about record labels screwing over bands. It fascinates me because it's the same story with every band, but I cannot get enough of hearing it because record labels are such fucks, man. I just love hearing these stories, and there's some good stories from John Speck. We talked for 2 hours, and it seems to me like it went about 20 minutes. So much that I had to use the bathroom twice during this interview, and I emptied out a Ted Nugent cup that Joey Rock and Roll gave me at the Rock and Pod Expo. I had to pee in the cup twice during this interview because I didn't want to get up and use the toilet, so... I hope you enjoy it, friends. I let John Speck pick the opening and closing songs of the episode. He picked this one, and he picked the closing one. This song is from their latest album, which was a Pledgemusic thing they did in 2017. That came in my top 10 of 2017. This song is... Oh, wait a minute. No, I take that back. This song, the song he picked was actually on Light 'Em Up, which was the album that was supposed to be on Sire Records, but Sire Records dropped them before the record even came out. This song is called Snap. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Rock and Roll Geek Show. Let John Speck know that you heard him on this show so he doesn't think he wasted 2 hours of his time. And thank you, everybody, who donates to the show. I'm not going to say who you are on this one because the show is so long, but you know who you are. I will thank you on the next one. Hope you enjoy this John Speck interview. I think it was pretty good. We a lot of good stories. Yes. So John Speck picked this one. This is track 10 from the Light 'Em Up album that eventually came out on Idol Records. This album is classic. This is a great album. Do yourself a favor, friends. Look for the Fags music, because if you're a fan of catchy rock, you cannot go wrong with the Fags. All right, here's Snap, and then we'll go right into the John Speck interview.
Try to get it right. I don't care if it takes a song.
John Speck. Thanks for coming on the Rock and Roll Geek Show. I really appreciate it.
Hey, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. I'm a huge fan of the Fags, as you probably know. Maybe you don't know. I don't know. But so, yeah, I'm a huge fan of yours and the Fags. I would like to maybe just talk a little bit of rock and maybe go a little bit of history of John Speck.
Sure.
John Speck, this is your life. All right.
Right.
So the story of the Fags is kind of a typical heartbreaking rock and roll story, I guess, right?
I don't know. I mean, I guess it's easy to look at it that way, but honestly, in retrospect, I mean, we didn't make it easy on ourselves, from the name on down.
Yeah, take it back a little bit before the Fags. Take it back a little bit before the tragedy begins. All right.
Right.
So you were in a band called Horse, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
All right. So I graduated high school in '90, and I went to college for a year in Tucson at the University of Arizona, and I came back after a year realizing like college wasn't where my head was at, and I moved back to Detroit. I joined this band called the Generals, and they were like all guys in their mid-20s, and they'd put a couple records out locally, and they were touring like the circuit, and I went out with those guys, and I learned a lot under their wings. And when that like lost its head of steam, I had just started kind of writing songs on my own because I was like just a guitarist in that band. Right. And so I was thinking about bringing them to the Generals, and a friend of mine in another band was like, dude, you should just do your own thing. And I was like, oh, I don't know, man, because I wasn't a singer or anything like that. But the Generals were kind of breaking up, like not really breaking up, but not really gigging anymore. And the drummer was a good buddy of mine, so I said, hey, would you like to like get together in a practice space and just kind of run through a couple things? I've got a couple song ideas I'm working on. And he was like, sure, just curious. That turned into Horse. And it was the first time I ever like sang in a band, and it was the first time I was like the main songwriter in a band and all that. And it was a trio because I just didn't get along with singers. It was really, really hard because I didn't have a whole lot of confidence, but it was really, really hard to like get the idea of the song across when just a standalone singer is trying to bring his thing to it as well.
That's kind of typical of guitar players and singers in all bands, kind of.
Right. And not to diminish what great singers bring to it, but it was the first time I was ever really writing, and so I was just trying to kind of get the melodies out of my head, and I didn't have a 4-track or anything to demo, so like in a practice space, it was really hard to get a singer on the same page.
What kind of music were you into at this time? What was your favorite band at the time?
The guys in the Generals, like I was 18 and then just 19 when I joined the band, and those guys were like 24, 25, 26, and they had really, really great musical taste. Like, we all had the same kind of common punk rock and classic rock and whatever background, but those guys were like a little further down the punk rock line than me. They were really comfortable with like going back to their old records. You know how like if you get into a style of music, you kind of abandon the stuff that might not be cool compared to, like when I got into punk rock, like heavy metal kind of went by the wayside for a little while.
Right, yes.
And these guys, when I joined the band, these guys were like all about like Tony the singer had like a ridiculous amount of cassettes of David Bowie bootlegs, like live stuff, like Ziggy Stardust era with Mick Ronson. And so we'd go on the road and he'd have that, or he'd have like Stones bootlegs, or I was hip to the jam, but those guys were listening to Setting Suns, not In the City, But they also had really weird stuff like The Blood, like almost oi bands. Those guys had in their record collections, where it was like, wow, you guys have everything. And so I was listening to stuff like that, Elvis Costello, Nick Lowe, Rockpile, just anything that was cool. You know, if it had a guitar or a really good, hot sounding band, and it had a hook, it was entertaining. Like the first time I ever heard the Misfits, I was blown away because it was really hooky music.
Yeah, that was the Walk Among Us album, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the same thing with the Descendants. The first time I heard the Descendants, I was like, oh my God, it's like the Beach Boys with caffeine and distortion.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. Pretty much started the whole pop punk thing was the Descendants.
Yeah, and before that, like, so my family, my dad's side of the family are originally from the Detroit area, but when he was 12, they all moved out. His immediate family moved out to Southern California, and that's where I was born. And I was raised in, like, Orange County, and listening to, like, KLOS and K-Rock, and it was, you know, back when I was a kid, you'd hear Missing Persons and then Devo and then Sammy Hagar all back to back. It was all just kind of music. And you know, I really got into anything that just had a really good hook. And my dad and my mom listened to cool music too. Like my dad was more folk and stuff like that. Like, and my mom was the rocker. So like on my dad's side, it was like Steely Dan and the Doobie Brothers and Crosby, Stills and Nash and Kenny Rankin and Carole King and James Taylor and stuff like that. And then on my mom's side, it was like Hendrix and Cream, and I got my, you know, Jefferson Airplane and the Stooges, Raw Power. Those records, like, I literally, like, stole out of my mom's, like, you know, her crate of records that they combined when they got married, you know?
Right. So Horse, you were this was the first band you were actually writing stuff, and you were bringing the pop hooks in.
I was trying to, like, at the time I was listening to, and I mean, everybody dogs on the Goo Goo Dolls, but they're from Buffalo.
First Goo Goo Dolls album is great.
First couple, man.
Yeah.
And
Actually,
Detroit
yes. All the way up
was
to a boy
part of
named
their
Goo.
scene. You know, they were touring Detroit. Yeah. Like, when I was starting to get out and go to shows, they were playing, like, maybe every 6-8 weeks in Detroit. And they would play, like, this little bar in Hamtramck, Lily's. And this is still when they were all playing barefoot, and they had the original drummer, George, and Robbie, the bassist, sang most of the songs.
Right.
They were fucking amazing.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, they would come in the middle of a fucking snowstorm, pile in their gear, and then take their shoes off and start fucking playing on a fucking cold stage in front of, like, you know, 30, 40 people.
Yeah, they were like Replacement's younger brothers type of band.
Exactly. And we were really hip to the Replacements, and Soul Asylum, early Soul Asylum was so good.
Exactly.
And the Generals, we were, like, on the same tour circuit as Soul Asylum. It was like every gig we played, we were, like, you know, basically the same venue 3 weeks behind them. You'd always see, like, the old show poster from, like, a couple weeks previous.
Yeah, you were both Midwest bands, and you toured the Midwest circuit, and there was all the same places to play, and yeah.
Yeah, and there were a lot of really, really good bands, like, you know, just workman bands in the Midwest, you know, like.
And what
Detroit.
year was this?
This would have been like 91, 92, 93 is when Horse actually started.
Okay.
And we started playing around town and the regional gig occasionally. And then there was a local radio station that was actually just over the border in Windsor, Canada, but it's right across the Detroit River, and they're like basically like half Detroit, half Canadian station, 89X. And the program director at the time, because this was kind of it was like the early days of alternative, quote unquote, radio. She was cool. Carrie Bertrand, and she used to go to a lot of shows, and I'd see her around, and our bassist hooked her up with a copy of whatever songs we were working on at the time, and she kind of flipped over it, and we put out a 7-inch, and she got on it a little bit, like on the local, kind of like, that hour at midnight or 11 o'clock where they play local music or whatever.
Right.
So we started getting a little bit of airplay, like in a small way, and it led to better opening slots. So for a while, like, Horse was like a really, really, like, we were the band that opened up for a lot of the decent shows that would come to town. Like, we opened up for the Jesus Lizard and the Digits. We opened up, just the Doughboys. We did some shows with the Goo Goo Dolls back in the day and became friendly with them. But, we did a lot of, like, gigs around town, and then Paw came through town. And their tour manager, Gus Brandt, had been through town about a month and a half previous with Raging Slab and Monster Magnet and Paw. And they needed an opening band. He heard the demo from our bassist, who was working that show as like local crew. And so the next time he came through town with Paw, he kind of slid us on as like the very first opener, like local opener at St. Andrews Hall, which is like the 1,000-seat ballroom, like where the heyday of live shows at the time, that was the pinnacle. So we opened up for them, and we just knocked it out of the park. Green Apple Quickstep was on tour with them, and a couple days later they got their trailer ripped off at their motel. And so they dropped off the tour. They were going through some like drug problems and shit like that, and they were just not feeling healthy. They dropped off the tour, and we got a call and was like, hey, can you guys finish this tour opening up for us? And we didn't have a van, so we borrowed some money and bought like a clunker and went out on the road with Paw for the last 3 weeks of their tour, and it was the last tour before they were going to go in and start working on their second record. And at the very end of the tour cycle, during soundcheck, the guitarist and Paw came up to me and said, hey, our bassist is quitting the band after this. What would you think about joining the band as our bassist?
Huh.
And I said, oh my God, I'm super flattered. But my band's doing pretty good, and I'm really happy with where I'm at. And he's like, right on, man. And it was really cool because he had kind of taken me under his wing on the road, and we would meet up for coffee a little before sound checks, and he would just tell me about excuse me, all his experiences leading up to where they were at. Being in a bidding war and this and that. They were one of the first bands signed in the wake of Nirvana.
Okay.
And they'd signed to A&M, and they had really, really good management and booking agent and all that. And he's like, this is what we did, this is what we experienced, this is what I would have done differently. And so it was like a crash course. At the end of that tour, I got back, and maybe 2 weeks later, our drummer, who I had played in the Generals with previous to this, his wife got, their entire company was doing a job transfer down to Atlanta. And so he was going to be moving in a matter of, months. And so I called Grant, the guitarist in Paw, and I said, hey, dude, our band's on hold. Are you still looking for a bassist? And he was like, well, you got to kind of try out at this point. So I hustled. I did I made my way out to Lawrence, and I ended up joining the band. And I was in the band for their second record, but as soon as we got into the studio, we started talking about publishing splits. And I had been brought into the band under the explicit, I want you to help work on writing and stuff. Grant's the main songwriter, but I think he was looking for somebody to bring in just an extra set of ears.
So he had heard your song. He had heard your songs in Horse and thought you were a good songwriter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
So Horse breaks up or goes on hiatus.
Yep.
And you join that band. Okay, go ahead.
So I'm in Paw. They're managed by Q Prime.
Uh-huh.
They're signed to A&M.
Big time company.
We are working with Cliff Norell, who was Scott Litt, who had produced all the the big REM records. Cliff Norell was Scott Litt's right-hand guy on all those records. So this was him starting to do his own production, as producer of major records. So we're working with Cliff Norrell. We're recording at Pachyderm Studios outside of Minneapolis, where In Utero, the Jayhawks, all these great records were done out there. It's just this amazing studio. You live in a house adjacent to the studio out in the woods, and it's just incredible. And Grant and I were like just, good buds. As soon as I started talking about songwriting splits, when we were, talking about paperwork and this and that, I got froze out of the band. And it got so uncomfortable that I didn't finish the record. I was only there for about 3 weeks.
What do you think? He wanted you to help write songs, and then he was going to get all the credit?
I don't know. I mean, I don't want to criticize him, because given how young I was and my attitude coming into it, I was kind of like a bull in a china shop. I didn't approach it with kid gloves the way that you or I might do if we were ever asked to be part of a larger project nowadays, with our experience.
So he thought,
I was in my early 20s.
This cocky kid, who's he think he is? He's coming in here and already talking business.
Right. But I wrote on that record, I wrote 2 of the songs I wrote all the music to. They were actually horse songs reconfigured with different lyrics that I let their singer write. But I was guiding him with the vocal melody, sing it like this, here's kind of the rhythm, fit this into that, or phrase this line this way. But yeah, I did about half of the songs on the record I had cut with him, and we had already gone into a studio in Lawrence, Kansas, and cut about 25, 30 songs live, with just minimal overdubs at a really good studio there. And that's funny because within the Paw fan community, those demos, those pre-production demos that we cut so the producer could hear where we were at with songs, and that would be culled down for what became the record, those are actually considered by a lot of the fans to be stronger than the actual record itself, which was way more produced and polished. And all that stuff is all me, and it's all live in the studio, and there's a lot of it's pretty cool to listen to, because you definitely hear a band, working it out. But we butted heads so severely in the studio, I just left midway through it. We couldn't. Grant literally stopped talking to me completely. He would sit in the room and tell his brother, the drummer, "Can you tell him that blah 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 and so and so?" That's how uncomfortable.
All
it was.
Because you were talking about splitting publishing.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, hey, let's get the songwriting all and it was it wasn't from a monetary standpoint that my motivation. It was literally thinking about album credits. We were putting the album together, and we were talking about who, the photographer was coming out in a couple of weeks to do some shoot at the studio and blah blah blah. And I was just all right, well, let's get the songwriting splits nailed down, so that way, when they come time to do the liner notes or in the album artwork. that was my brain, because I was 21, 22 years old,
Yeah, you were this was your fantasy, looking on the little label on the inside of the record, and you would see in parentheses who wrote it.
And I was the guy, I was the point man dealing with the management all through the songwriting process. When we were when I moved out to Lawrence, me, Mark the singer, and Peter the drummer were living in one house, and then our next neighbor, which was about a mile up the road, because we were out in the farm, just outside of downtown Lawrence, a couple miles outside of town, and it's basically Children of the Corn. It's all just flatland farms. So the next house over was Grant, the guitarist, his place. And we rented a house. The 3 of us were in this rented farmhouse with the dining room converted into a rehearsal space with a full PA and, all our gear set up. And when we were practicing and working on songs, we were working 6-8 hours a day, nonstop, just playing. and learning stuff. And a lot of times, if we weren't playing, I was being called over to Grant's house to sit on the porch, and he would show me a song he had been working on, or play me a demo so I could kind of learn the part and hear it. And then we would kind of like spitball it a little bit and get comfortable where he's like, yeah, I like what you're doing there. And then that way when we brought it up at practice, I had an idea of where they were at, you know.
But as soon as you start bringing up who's going to get credit for what, he turns into a shut.
Yeah, it just got ugly. But you know what? Like I don't have any problem with Grant anymore. You know, like things were really ugly for a while afterwards, and like so I leave the studio and I move back to Detroit, and it was weird. Like my per diem, we got our per diems in a monthly check, and it was basically like $25-$30 a day, something like that,
right.
And that was the only money I had coming in. And I had that last month's per diem check, and I hadn't put it in the bank. And when I got home to Detroit, I put it in the bank and paid bills against it after, you know, it was deposited. And then I got calls from the bank, and they were like, the check has been
bummer.
stopped. And
it
is already
per
cleared.
diem? Wait a minute.
That's how ridiculous Q Prime, whoever their guy was, like it had literally cleared. I had written 2 checks on bills. Now this is back in the days when you wrote checks and put them in, there was a little lag in whatever in me paying my bills, but all of a sudden I got a stop check on my pay.
They put a stop payment on your per diem that you were already owed because it was per diem that you had already earned.
Yeah, but I mean that's how hard it was,
man.
And all right, so check this out. So me and Robbie the bassist in Horse were like, I come back and I just got like I had my tail between my legs when I moved back because it was under shitty circumstances. And then they did that, and I ended up bouncing 2 fucking checks.
Oh, fuck.
And and our drummer has moved out of town with his wife, and the bassist and I are like, what are we gonna, he's like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, what I definitely don't want to do is sit around. Yeah. So we start the band, we start the momentum rolling back in the band, and we actually drove down to Atlanta. We rented a van and drove down to Atlanta twice to practice.
This is Horse again, right?
Yep.
Okay, yeah.
So we practiced with our original drummer twice. And it was great, but we were like driving back the second time, and it's like we can't keep doing this, man. Yeah. Like where we go once a month down for like a short weekend. And I was like, man, I can't imagine getting rid of Matt, but we got to do what we got to do, because I had already seen what was going on, and I'd been in the business at this point and done this record and dealt with Q Prime and dealt with Pinnacle booking and blah blah blah. So I was like, I was like very motivated. I was like, all right, we got to get a drummer. And we get back to town, and a buddy of ours who managed St. Andrews for a while was like, Jimmy Paluzzi just got kicked out of Sponge. And I knew Jimmy Paluzzi because his old band and my old band, the Generals, had played shows together. And going back to the Goo Goo Dolls, there was the same 30 people at their gigs every time they played. Jimmy was one of them. You couldn't miss him because he was tall and he had green fucking hair.
And Sponge was a fairly well-known. They were a somewhat well-known band. They were on a major label or something. They were a pretty well-known band.
They were at the very, very height of their ascent at the time he got kicked out. They had just put out their first record on Columbia, and it had gone. It had 2 singles that were jumping all over MTV and radio, and they were selling a bunch of records. And Jimmy just everything happened super duper fast, and it put a shit ton of pressure on that band, and Jimmy became the scapegoat for anything that was going wrong, even though the guys in the band were all like good friends of his. It was the pressure built, and he was the guy, he was the casualty. So he had been kicked out of Sponge. He was, fucking pissed off and like, ugh. and they were just, like right after he got kicked out of the band was when their like videos were on heavy rotation, and he's in the videos, but he's not the guy playing the gigs or getting the paycheck.
Yeah.
So he joins our band, and it was funny because like we had a meeting, and after the meeting, our bassist Robbie, the bassist, looks at me and he goes, "What do you think?" And I go, "Here's what I think, dude. He's got a van, he's got a PA, and he's got a practice space."
Hey, did you guys advertise as former members of Sponge?
No, I didn't want anything to fucking do with it because it was so not what we sounded like.
Yeah.
And I didn't like Sponge. Like I didn't know the guys that well. I knew who they were, but we weren't friends at the time. And I was, a generation and a half younger than all the rest of the dudes in that band, so I had no respect for them. Like I didn't give a fuck who they had played in before and all the dues they had paid in this band and that.
But he was
blah,
a
blah,
good
blah.
drummer, and he had a PA, and he had a van.
And a practice space, and he could sing. He was like a really good singer too, and he had great like charisma. He had a look. Like Jimmy was because Jimmy was playing in a band called the Trash Brats in Detroit before he joined Sponge, and they were the biggest fucking band in Detroit for a little while.
That's right.
So it was an easy thing. So we started getting together, and it really sounded good. Now, Jimmy had all these contacts. He was the business-minded guy in Sponge when all this shit was going on. And so he had paid a lot of attention and been a really nice guy, and so he had a lot of contacts. And that same girl, Carrie Bertrand from 89X, who had played horse just a little bit on that radio station, she came sniffing around. I had already, when I moved back from Paw, I had booked some studio time at a studio, and I was like, I want to go in and do some demos of these new songs I have. And when Jimmy joined, I was like, I'm going to, let's go into the studio. I've got some time. And he's like, you know what? He goes, my buddy Tim that did the Sponge record will record us for free, and we don't have to pay for it.
Oh, nice.
And I was like, well, and he's like, well, let's just try it. And if we don't like it, we can, go to your spot. And I was like, all right. So Tim had done the Sponge record. We went out to outside of Ann Arbor to Tim's studio, Tim Paddlin's studio. We did 6 songs in like a day. We recorded them the first day, all the tracks, and then the next day we did a mix. And out of that, we put out a 7-inch. And the program director at 89X, we got her like a DAT copy of the recording, and she started playing it on their radio station, and it went from late night to getting a lot of phones to getting more late night play to getting like various like times during the day to medium rotation to heavy rotation. And when it got into heavy rotation, the other commercial stations in town started adding it because at the time you still had some leeway in your playlist.
Yeah, and none of this shit would happen nowadays.
No, not at all. But back then, the other program directors, these are all local people, and they were all going to shows, and they knew us, and blah, blah, blah. They started adding it because they didn't want to get scooped by this other station. So within, like, a month and a half of putting this 7-inch out, we were on heavy rotation on, like, 3 or 4 of the major stations in town.
That must have been a pretty good rock scene back then in Detroit.
Yeah, Detroit was weird. Like, Detroit was, like, one of those, like, there were bands back in the day, like, if you think about, like, bands that were touring that were, like, starting to not see the crowds they used to have. Like, I remember one tour, it was Rollins Band and Primus, and it was supposed to be a longer tour, and they ended up shortening the tour, and Detroit was the last stop. It ended up being the last show on the tour prematurely, but like they made that decision because of bad ticket sales. But the Detroit stop sold like twice as many tickets on average as any other city on their tour. Detroit was really weird and like super duper like supportive of rock and roll.
Yeah.
And bands, even past their prime, it's like, you come here and you're going to probably pack a room. So we started getting a bunch of radio play, and this is back in the day when, like, the Friday morning quarterback whatever it is, that the trade magazines and like the radio magazines and Billboard and whatnot, they were and hits. They're getting these playlist reports every week, and it's showing us in like, you know, like third in rotation, and the next bands above us are like U2 and Prince.
And you're an unsigned band.
Station.
You're just a band that's not signed at all.
And that's what it says, because, you know, like if you remember those playlists, the way they used to print them, it would be like the band, the name of the song, and the label.
That's right.
And then, you know, in the position and time and, you know, like how many spins and weeks in the chart or whatever, it would always say like unsigned.
Oh.
You know, so all the people in the business were reading this, and they started seeing this. And Detroit was like a major market, radio market, like Market 5 or whatever it was called back then. So we started getting people sniffing around,
record labels coming around.
Yeah,
so, hey.
Yeah, and this is like 2-3 months after I moved back from, you know, quitting, being kicked out of PA.
Did you guys have management at the time?
No. I mean, we didn't. We were a local band. You know, we had barely done out of town gigs. You know, just you know, like
so
Columbus
labels are sniffing around, and they had to talk to you guys. You couldn't refer them to your manager.
We didn't have a manager, but managers were sniffing around. Booking agents were sniffing around. You know, the A&R guys were sniffing around. So we met a manager guy from LA who we liked a lot. And, you know, as soon as the buzz started happening, we started getting offers for shows out of town.
You must have been feeling pretty good at this point.
We were very confident, but we were really, really good. We were a really good band. We were packing them in Detroit, and it was fueling out of town gigs. Right. We were getting like, this is back in the heyday of the different festivals, the music festivals like CMJ and the New Music Festival and all that. Right. We were getting all these offers to play showcases and South by Southwest, when South by Southwest was like the hardest gig in the fucking world to get. Right. You know, because it was so much smaller.
These were all big industry type deals for insiders.
Yeah. So we were getting these gigs, and we were delivering. You know, like we were playing, and so we had this guy come in from LA, and he wanted to manage the band, and he spent quite a lot of time in Detroit wooing the band, and we put him through the ringer, and we said, all right, we'll tell you what, we'll take you on in a temp position. You deal with some of these people that are like wanting to like deal with us, and we'll see how you handle it. Right. And if things go well, you know, like we'll continue to work together or whatever, and blah blah blah. We didn't end up signing with him, but he did a lot and helped us get like a booking agent and whatnot. And that booking agent kept getting us gigs because basically we had so many A&R people clamoring, and regional, you know, like reps first, and then the bigger A&R guys and whatnot. But everybody was like, I need to see this band. I need to coordinate some of my other, you know, like people in my office to see this band because I heard this demo and I love it. And so we had a booking agent that was like, I need to book you guys more shows. Right. Because they can't come in this weekend when you have a gig here or wherever. So we need to book another gig. So I'm going to book you guys in Chicago, open it up for, you know, Rights of the Accused or whatever. So we were playing like all these really kick-ass shows. We were a really, really good band. We were really tight. We had good songs. I was really motivated to write. And so we had a bidding war going on. But by the time we settled on a manager, that took forever. And then by the time we ended up separating the wheat from the chaff for a record deal, it took forever. And then we went right into the studio once we signed with RCA. We gave them a record like a month later because we were ready to go. Why
RCA and not another label? What did RCA offer that no one else did? Or the major one to go with them?
Oh, that's a fucking story. I mean, we met with everybody. We had James Dowdle from Island was really, really on our dick. We were dealing with Jason Flom when he was at Lava, like Tag Lava, and Val Azzoli was the president of Atlantic, and we had to sit down with those guys, like, and it just didn't end well. We were really, really cocky. We were very Detroit. You know, I was, I don't know, 24.
You thought you were king shit.
Well, we were, man. We were bad motherfuckers from around town, and we were listening to these guys give us the hustle. And, you know, and we were acting like we were talking to dudes in Detroit. You know, like Val Azzoli, we're sitting at this, you know, gigantic conference table, and Val Azzoli's at one end, and I'm at the other, directly facing him, with all our other people, like, on the sides. And he's telling me about why Atlantic is, like, the place we want to be, because... And I'll never forget his hands. He does this kind of like thing, like if you dropped a feather and how it kind of floats back and forth, sort of like dun dun, like trapeze left and right as it falls down. He goes, Atlantic is great because we have a series of safety nets. And he starts motioning his hands, and he goes, you know, like if the head of radio promo doesn't like your single and doesn't want to push it, we have college radio to like pick up the slack and like get it out there and, you know, like build up a groundswell. And I just stopped him, and I was like, I was beside myself. I go, hey, let me just make an observation, Val.
You thought that was kind of douchey of him.
This is exactly what I told him. I said, my dad is an executive for Corvette for General Motors and has worked there his entire fucking career. And he is the model year manager and tooling manager for Corvette. And if his boss gives him, like, his part of the responsibility of, like, okay, we are bringing this to production by such and such a date. You need to get this, and that handled. If he gets this handed to him on his desk, and he looks up and goes, you know what? I don't really like the design or the way we're headed with this, so I'm not going to do that. But, you know, the guy next door, he'll pick up my shit. He'd get fired. I go, so you're telling me that your head of radio promo has the option of telling you whether he likes a song you give him to promote? And if he doesn't like it, it doesn't get promoted, so hopefully the people lower on the rung of your system of safety nets are going to, like, maybe try and get us back up to his level of consideration. I go, that's fucked. Why the fuck would we sign with you?
And
that's exactly what I fucking said.
You probably blew this guy's mind, too, when you said that.
Oh, and our fucking manager guy sitting on the side of us is like, you know, he looked like his head was going to fucking fall off.
You're going to blow it.
Oh, yeah. But, I mean, that's what we were doing. We were not bullshitting. We were just like, this is fucking bullshit. Shut the fuck up.
And you had come from the punk rock days when you were skeptical about major labels anyway.
Exactly. But here's the thing. I had been in Paw and dealt with it on a very small scope, but at a big level. And Jimmy had been up there with Columbia and all their booking guys, you know, everybody that was working with Sponge as they were taken off. So Jimmy wasn't coming from like punk rock, like ethics or whatever and skepticism. Jimmy was coming from like business acumen and skepticism. And I was coming from the punk rock thing, but Jimmy's an East Side Detroiter, you know, like, you know, sees through the bullshit in a heartbeat. So the two of us were kind of like, yeah, whatever. And, you know, long story short, RCA was the only people left standing when the dust fucking cleared.
Oh, so you fucked it. You blew everybody else off, and by then no one else was interested in you. So the last one interested was RCA. And
our manager was, you know, best fucking buddies with the number 2 at RCA. Bob Jameson was running RCA at the time. Jack Rovner was the number 2 and basically like the guy kind of running the day-to-day. And our manager, David Pasick, when Jack Rovner got married, David and his wife went on the honeymoon to some like island with them. So what did you learn from that experience of having nothing left but RCA being interested in you? What did you learn from that? honestly maybe like sometimes take a risk and go with the long shot or go with your gut. Like we listened. The thing I really kind of took away from like the whole experience with Horse was we tried to play ball. We waited to get like a good manager and tried to like do all the vetting and all that, and like we thought we had the strongest manager we could possibly get, and then we negotiated for a really, really good record deal and RCA, and it was this and that. I mean, it took 6 months of just back and forth contract negotiations before we could even start working on a record. We thought we did everything right.
You thought you were doing the right thing.
And we got so much bad advice along the way. We were early on. We had delivered the record, but it was in the pipeline, and it wasn't going to come out for like maybe 8 months at the earliest. And we were doing like little short jaunt tours here and there with bands.
What was RCA's reason for not releasing the album?
Just getting it into the marketing plan, where because we were a new band, and for a while we were such a buzz band. Like we played the BMG National Convention alongside like Wu-Tang Clan, in January, where they're like, they're rolling out the big projects for that year. Like we were hyped up internally, but we just kept waiting because it was like, we have to get you guys in the right time where we're really going to give it the push and blah blah blah. They're giving you all the
bullshit.
The schmooze. But you don't know, and you definitely don't want to sit around and second guess these guys because
you think they know what they're doing.
Exactly. So
meanwhile, all your friends are going, "When's the album coming out? When's the album coming out?"
When we got offered at one point, we got a call from our A&R guy, and he's like, "So I was talking to your booking agent, and you have been offered a show in Minneapolis on cable TV."
Whoop-de-doo.
And he goes, and we're like, okay. And he goes, it's something called X Games. This was the first X Games. And it was going to be held in Minneapolis, and it was going to be broadcast on ESPN. And he's like, it's sort of like a skateboarder, snowboard, sort of like punk rock sort of alternative thing. And we're like, all right. And he goes, I strongly suggest you do not play that show.
So the label doesn't even want you to play gigs.
Well, all right. So our A&R guy is telling us he doesn't want us to play this gig, and we're like, what? And he goes, I don't want you guys being branded as a punk band. You're so much more than that.
Well, kind of.
And this was 96. So Green Day, Rancid, Offspring, the big heyday had happened already, and it was like, who has longevity? Right. Because punk, this was a couple years after Rancid's big breakthrough and Dookie for Green Day and all that. It was like, who's going to stick around? I don't want you guys to be just like a flash in the pan. That was his reasoning, which sounded very logical to us. And he's like, the label would, not to say you can't do it, but the label would kind of appreciate if you didn't, because we don't want you to get pigeonholed. So
meanwhile, the label hasn't put your album out yet.
Right. Then,
by the way, friends, we have not even got to the Fags yet. Just so
right. Well, then we got an offer from our booking agent. He's like, yeah, there's this band from Southern California. We figured we'd send you guys out with them, like blah, blah, blah. What are they called? Blink-182.
Oh,
what do they sound like?
They don't want you to be in the punk thing.
What do they sound like? They sound like you guys. Oh, yeah, that's cool. And again, we were discouraged from doing those tours by our label. And this is all before our record's coming out. But the tours they wanted us to do were Seven Mary 3. We went on the road with them and just went over like a fucking lead balloon.
Yeah, bands.
We opened up for Jackal in their fucking hometown.
Oh, nice.
Oh, my God. We almost got fucking bottled off the stage.
Well, yeah.
You know, we were playing terrible gigs.
Right. They were putting you in with bands that you totally didn't fit with.
And this is at the the heyday of Seven Mary 3 and blah blah blah.
Meanwhile, the record has no release date yet.
Not even. It got pushed back. It was supposed to come out in like fucking January of '97, and then blah blah blah, and it ended up coming out in August of '97. And we played our last show New Year's Eve '97-'98.
So
a few months after the record came out.
The label dropped you?
Well, we had come off some bad tours, going out on the road supporting these bands they wanted us to do, and we were really demoralized, and there was a lot of infighting, and me and Jimmy were really butting heads, like
You're all
really
disheartened.
Bad.
The business had eaten the band horse up.
And we were just not happy. And we were supposed to go out on the road, and if they told me I had zoned because I was an idiot, so I'm like, what do you mean we got to go back out in a week and a half? And they're like, yeah, you guys are going out for 3 weeks with this band, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, who? And they're like, look, this is your last shot. This has been worked out by your manager, the label, the booking agents, your indie promo guys that we've hired, blah, blah, blah. You're going to go out, build at 75% with this band that is just breaking. They're a BMG distributed band. They've got a little buzz at radio right now. You guys are about to, and this is all going to be 500 to 1,500 seaters. We've got every single product buyer, this, that, and the other coming out, radio promo guy, regional, this, that. It's all been put together so that they're going to see both of your bands, and they're going to, we're going to get this jump started.
And what band was that?
And that's exactly what I said. I go, who? And they said, Creed. And Creed had just gotten an early ad at WRAF locally in Detroit, so I was hearing them for about 3 weeks previous, and I hated their fucking music so bad.
Right, yeah.
And I was like, there's no fucking way we are going to go out on the road opening up for a band like that.
Well, it could have done good for you.
They said, if you don't, you're done. Huh. And I was like, I'm not fucking going to go out on the road with Creed.
You said, don't threaten me. Fuck you. We're done.
Well, I was just like, we're not going on the road with that band. Like, we're gonna, their audience is gonna fucking hate us. And they're like, it's not about their audience. It's about the people you're gonna play in front of that need to see you, blah blah blah, to put your record in stores and get it on radio.
The business people. You had to play the game.
But we were so mad, and I was so fucking, head up my ass.
This was your punk rock coming out.
Well, it wasn't the punk rock. It was just the frustration. It was like, fuck that. I'm sick of going over like shit in front of a bunch of frat bros, because that was all the people going to see Seven Mary 3 and this and that. I was like, I don't want to go on the road trying to play like, a watered down version of the Replacements and the fucking, Descendants or Goo Goo Dolls. That's kind of what Horse sounded like, And
meanwhile,
we were going over terrible. So we didn't do the tour, and our booking agent dropped us immediately. Then our manager dropped us immediately. And then our label told us, your record is done.
You're done.
But we owed them at least another record firm. We had a 2 and 2 option deal, so we had to break up just to get out of the contract.
Yeah.
So we broke up, and me and the drummer didn't get along at all, and everything. And I was so pissed off. But I still had music I had started to work on for what might have been a second Horse record, and the producer of the Horse record, Tim Padalin, who had done the Sponge record, I got in touch with him, and I was like, I want to come out and do some demos. I played drums on some of it, some other drummer friends of mine from around town. I did all the other, instruments, and just put some demos together. And Tim was like, can I get Jimmy out here to play on one or two of these songs? And I was like, fuck no, why?
That's the drummer that you can't stand.
Right. Well, we had just, we were button heads, but besides that, we were in a pressure cooker too, so it didn't make anything any better, easier. So he's like, I want to bring him out because I really like the way you guys interact. And I was like, ugh. And he's like, you don't have to be here, dude. He goes, we'll cut it to a click. Just let me have him, cut a couple things. So he came out when I wasn't out at the studio a couple days, and then Tim calls me back out, and I heard it, and it was just head and shoulders above all the other stuff that we had cut. I was like, ugh. And I literally was like, God damn it. And he's like, why don't I have him come out and you guys can kind of like just, vibe a couple things around. So we started playing together and cutting things together, and it started sounding so good. And I go, hey, would you consider doing this, like as a thing? And he's like, what do you mean, as like a band and playing gigs and shit? And I go, yeah. And he goes, fuck no. And I go, right on, no big deal. We go back to recording. 3 weeks later, he's like, what do you think if maybe we book some shitty gig and try these songs out in front of a couple people? And I'm like, what do you have in mind? He's like, oh, my girlfriend's nephew's shitty band is playing downtown a couple Fridays
and you
from now.
Guys
we can
didn't,
open up from
you guys didn't really have a band name or anything like that. You weren't really.
It wasn't even a band. It was my solo record,
right?
Basically, but now we had solidified like a lineup to cut it.
Yeah,
it
this was a project you guys
Jimmy.
were just working on. No name project.
Right. Nothing at all. And Jimmy's like, why don't we just try and play these songs in front of a couple people? And I was like, okay. And he's like, we'll open up for my nephew, my girlfriend's nephew's crappy band. We'll play it 9:30 Friday night, a couple weeks from now. And I was like, that's fine. So he made a quarter-page flyer, like Xeroxed at Kinko's, whatever. And it was like a package it was a box of cigarettes with 3 cigarettes kind of like sticking out, and it said "Smoking Fags," kind of like the Marlboro Lights logo.
Did it say former members of Horse and Sponge?
No, nothing. It just said "Smoking Fags," 9 p.m. Jacoby's or whatever.
So he decided to call the band the Smoking Fags.
And it was a joke, and it was Jimmy's weirdo, isn't that the dumbest name? And I'm like, oh, that's terrible.
Kind of like,
he's like, I know, and he was never the art guy in Horse. Like, I did all the artwork and this and that. So, the fact that he had put together a flyer, he was like, it's the worst. And I was like, it is pretty bad. Yeah, man, okay. And so we played, but word got out, hey, John and Jimmy from Horse have this new thing that's going to play early, and it's a $5 show or something. So we loaded in for this gig and did a quick little line check. It was just like the only PA was for the vocals, it was a real small room.
Right.
We leave to go get a beer a couple doors down. We come back an hour and a half later, and we can barely get upstairs into this little room, that maybe holds like 60 people.
Well, that must have made you feel good.
No, it made us fucking nervous as shit, We're like, oh no, uh-oh. Because we were trying to play in front of 25 people and just see how these songs sounded in front of an audience. Like could we play them? Because it didn't sound like Horse. Horse always relied on speed and volume and like, when in doubt, play it a little faster and a little more aggressively.
All right, but I've heard some of the Horse songs, and they don't sound that much different than the Fags.
Well, the record doesn't, because the record was our record for RCA that got remixed and retracked 4 different times before they were happy enough to put it out, and overthought and blah, 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 and neutered, Everybody liked the early stuff that Horse did as opposed to the record we put out.
So the songs that you were playing as the Smoking Fags that night,
It was a lot more melodic and a lot more restrained. Not to say that it was like mellow, but it wasn't putting a premium. Like, if you think about the Replacements, listen to like Kids Don't Follow off Stink.
Of course.
That's Mach 1, okay? Then listen to Alex Chilton,
sure,
or I'll Be You.
Okay. So what songs did you play as the Smoking Fags that night, the first gig? Do you remember?
Well, all right, so the first EP had Mistake and Hitman and List on it and stuff like that. It was, and truly, I don't know how many, I know we had Hitman, It was probably like a good like chunk of like the stuff that made up the record, but it was early versions. We weren't really where we needed to be in terms of like arrangements or how we put it
But
across.
the songs were super poppy and catchy and
but maybe they were a little more like in the demo stage. Like the arrangements were a little different, or I'm singing it a little different, or this or that. We hadn't really like taken it to its logical conclusion with each tune. As the band grew, like we kind of figured out what constitutes a fag song, or how to like take a song I was writing and make it sound like the band.
Did people like the set?
Oh my God, it went over like you couldn't
Loved
believe.
it. And then everybody left after you guys played, probably too.
Probably, right? Like, and 3 weeks later, I was at a bar, like a little like dive, and a buddy of mine comes up and he's like, "Hey man, when are the Fags playing again?" And I was like,
"Oh, so now you were known as the Fags." And
I was like, "Who the Fags?" And there was another band actually from Ann Arbor, about 45 minutes away, called the Fags at the time. And I was like, "Oh, I don't know. I don't think they're playing together anymore." And he's like, No, Smoking Fags." And I go, "Oh," he goes, "Dude, I saw that set. That was fucking awesome." And I'm like, "Oh, thanks." I go, "Dude, that's not our name." And he's laughing. He goes, "Well, anyways, when are you guys playing together again?" And I go, "I don't know. We don't have anything booked." I go to practice like a day later, and I'm kind of like pissed off. I'm like, so I ran into a buddy of mine last night, and he's like, "Hey, when are the Fags playing again?" And Tim and Jimmy start dying laughing, like they're rolling around. And Tim's like, "That's brilliant. That's the fucking name of the band." And I'm like, "No, it's not the fucking name of the band." I go, "Dude, there's already another band in Ann Arbor called the Fags." He's like, "So?" He goes, "Fuck them." And I'm like, "No, not fuck them. Like, dude, we can't call this band the Fags." And Tim and Jimmy were so adamant about it and like dying laughing. Like they thought that was the dumbest, most subversive, most awesome thing ever. And I'm like trying to take the band serious, but at the same time, I was handling Jimmy with kid gloves because we had fought so much in Horse. Just the idea of us playing together, I didn't want to be an adversary. So like I was like trying to be really accommodating about everything. I didn't want to argue with him because we were making good music and we had good chemistry.
But at the time, the Fags wasn't that bad. I mean, because there was the Queers and there were bands like that. It was kind of wasn't a horrible name back then.
Well, yeah, it definitely wasn't as PC of a time, but it was. We weren't trying to be the Dead Kennedys, We were when we hit our stride, like when the band kind of really like gelled, was when we consciously made an effort to try and present the music under a certain sort of thing, like a genre almost. But our genre, like you remember on The Price is Right when you try to guess like the range that the whatever the thing was in, and it was like that it was going up the mountain kind of thingy, and it had like it could be between 6,300 and 7,800 or whatever, right? We were trying to represent a couple different genres of an era of late 70s to early 80s, and like I said earlier, like the program directors in California at the time at radio stations had a lot of leeway, so you could hear 3 Lockbox and then Turning Japanese,
right?
And I was taking all that in. We had like different feels to certain songs when we were cutting the demos and working on them in practice, and we were trying to agree upon like what makes this whole set sound cohesive, and it was a way of like putting the songs across. Like, not to say we were trying to sound like certain bands, we were trying to sound like a certain era of radio that we all listened to.
You were really thinking this stuff really through.
Honest to God.
But you called yourself the Fags.
We weren't trying to do it commercially. We were doing it only because it was the only way that it sounded cohesive when we played it live or recorded it. Otherwise, it just sounded like a bunch of different songs,
But you called yourself the Fags.
But and that drove me nuts from the get-go, because it was like I was this was my great like chance at redeeming a bunch of the shit that went sideways with Horse.
What did you want to call it?
John
Speck?
Actually, the first The first name I had for it was Bishop Murphy Hangovers, because Jimmy was a thrift store guy, and he would always go thrifting, and he would get, like, you know, cool T-shirts and work pants, and he was, like, way ahead of the curve. He would buy a pair of pants for 50 cents or $1 and then take them to the tailor and give him $3 to, like, you know, completely do them up for him, and then he'd wear them at the next gig, and it looked like he'd come off, you know, fucking London Street. He looked awesome, you know. And he gave me a T-shirt, and it was like a bowling team from some local league on the east side, and on the back it said Bishop Murphy Hangover. It was like some local church, their, like, goofball beer league bowling team. I always thought that was just such a dumb name for a band, so, like, the early reels, like, kind of used to jokingly write, like, Bishop Murphy Hangovers, and then I was like, what if we call it the Spares? So that was contention for a little bit. I never wanted to call it, like, a solo, like my name or anything, because I just thought that was stupid. I wanted, like, a band name, you know. But it stuck with the Fags, and
people started
I didn't want to argue.
And people, did you book more shows under the Fags name? Did you book another show as the Smokin' Fags or the Fags? I know we didn't do another show under Smokin' Fags, so I guess it was, like, immediately after that, I guess it became the Fags. And everybody just already knew you as the Fags. And it doesn't matter what a band name is, people get used to that name, and you just became known as that name. And however bad or, quote, bad a name is, people get used to it, and the name's not bad anymore.
Right, and you know what? Honest to God, we did not... Time, you know, we were trying to make a record, make like record good music. All our shows were just local stuff. It was just a chance to play, like for the sheer, you know, getting it out live. Like, we really wanted to play live. It wasn't trying to be to get to the next level commercially at that point. Like, we were literally still in the incubation stage. We were trying to, you know, really kind of, like, cement the band and hone our chops and get the songs nailed down, because we wanted to make a record. We had every intention of getting a record deal, but we weren't trying to do it right then. We were trying to get the songs together. So I guess at the time it didn't really matter that it was going to be called the Fags. I guess maybe in the back of my mind I was like, I'm sure I can convince these guys to change this at the point where it's going to matter. So, you know?
But about this time, Idol Records wants to put out the stuff that you recorded already, or what?
Well, we had been working on songs when it was going to be under the auspices of my solo record or whatever, and then it turns into the Fags, and then we do this EP, and we were selling the EP, like the 5-song EP. We were selling that at shows, like, as CDRs. Where we were like, would load into a gig, do sound, like, a line check, and then in the dressing room we had, like, a CDR, like,
yeah, you would
whatever,
burn CDs and sell them at the show.
And we're making them, and I had gone to Kinko's earlier that day and done a bunch of Xeroxing, so I've got the ruler and the fucking X-Acto, right. And Tim's making the dupes, and, you know, and we're selling, like, literal CDRs at the gigs for, like, you know, $5 a pop or whatever.
Right.
So Irv, that runs Idol Records, Irv's family are from this area in Michigan, but we know him because Jimmy met him through Sponge. He was the regional rep for the Chicagoland area for Sony when Jimmy was in Sponge, and they were promoting the record. So this guy's like, yeah, this dude's from like Brighton. He's really cool. He's in Chicago. And so we met him when he was still in Chicago. And then shortly thereafter, he got transferred down to Dallas to be the rep in Dallas for Sony. And at the same time, he started his own label, like just a little indie label. And he's like, hey, dude, I'll put that record out, man. We were friends with him, and we're like, that's cool. Sounds good. So he put it out, and we had real CD, and we had a guy that was like promoting it to radio and getting it in the trade magazines and whatever. We ended up fudge the numbers, like
Uh-oh, I'm losing you. I'm losing you, John.
You there?
Yeah, I'm gonna hang up and call you right back. We might be a time limit on this. I'm gonna call you right back. Okay.
All right, sounds good.
All right, I'm gonna get back recording here. Okay, we're back. So Idol Records wants to put out, this kid who has Idol Records wants to put out the EP.
Yeah, so he puts out the EP, and we really start selling. And
Oh, fuck. Fuck. So.
oh, no sweat.
All right. Okay, so.
I apologize. Sorry about that, man.
It's all right. So where were we?
So we not signed, but we agree to put out the EP with Idol with our buddy, and it's just a handshake deal. A good friend of ours, he promotes the shit out of it, and this is in the day when you would report your venue sales to SoundScan. So we were selling the crap out of the EP on the road because we were in the middle of a bidding war at this point. Like, people are starting to look at the band.
Huh.
We're playing South by Southwest. We're getting all these offers for gigs. So we're reporting, like we would sell 60, 65 copies of a record at a gig. Now we might have sold like, say, 50. Or 53, but we would write, 65 or 70 and report it and fax it to SoundScan. We were like just slightly inflating them because that looked really good, and it was like a bargaining chip when we were negotiating a record deal.
What would happen if you would have put, we sold 300?
Ask our drummer. I think that happened once or twice.
I mean, yeah. So major labels are starting, or record labels are starting to come around again because they heard about this, and they didn't mind that you were called the Fags.
At the time, it didn't seem to. I think everybody kind of like operated under the assumption that like if we sign him, I'm sure we can get him to change the name.
Right. Okay.
Or something like that.
Okay,
I don't know.
Makes sense.
So, and we started working with some people that we had relationships with back in the Horse days, like. Horse signed a publishing deal with Warner Chappell through a guy named Doogie Thompson. He was the bassist in Supertramp,
Oh,
and
nice.
he moved to the States, and he worked in publishing for Warner Chappell, and he lived in Chicago, and we dealt with him in Horse, and he kind of like lost his shirt on a publishing deal with us when we broke up. And when we started playing again, I think the second show we ever played in Chicago, or maybe the first, he came to, and we saw him afterwards. And I said to him, and he's a Scottish guy. I go, and we always used to imitate him in the band, because we had some crazy nights with him before back in the day. And I go to him. I go, so what do you think? And he goes, what do you mean? And I go, what do you think about the band? He goes, oh, about you guys. He's like, oh. Fucking me, it'll never work. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, you're fucking nuts. Jimmy's fucking nuts. And Tim, he's from another fucking planet, mate. Like, I do a bad accent, but nobody wanted to touch us because we were volatile weirdos from the Horse days of, like, the bidding wars.
Uh-huh.
And then we're in a band called the Fags, but the songs were really good and the shows were really good. And Seymour Stein was sniffing around Detroit. He had signed the Von Bondies, and so the garage scene was taken off in Detroit at the time, and so he was really like trying to like swoop up. It was like the old days, like you find one band and then they lead you to this one and that one and that one. So he was coming into town somewhat regularly, and they were like putting together showcases, like, hey, we're going to have like 4 of the hot bands we think. We're going to have you all on a bill to play for the record label or whatever. And our friend that was kind of like Seymour's point man in town, he was like, hey, we want to get you guys on one of these shows. And we're like, go fuck yourself. And he's like, what do you mean? You don't want to play for Seymour? I'm like, yeah, we can play for Seymour. Tell him he can come over to a practice. You can come see us at band practice, but we're not going to book a show with a couple other schmuck bands and, do the cattle call. And so Seymour didn't want to come to a practice, but we met him for a lunch. He took us to lunch, and we talked, and he had the music, and he's like, well, I'd like to see you guys play live. And we're like, well, we're playing New York such and such. And he's like, all right, I'll be there. So he came to the show, and we ended up working out a deal. And the record deal that we negotiated with Sire Warner Brothers was the most amazing thing you could ever fucking imagine. It was like zero money with the most ridiculous royalty rate. I think we had like close to 25 fucking percent, 25 fucking points. You know, whereas like Horse, in the midst of a bidding war, the best we were able to negotiate was like maybe 13.5 points on the record.
So, but they gave you an advance though.
Well, the record deal was for a flat $50,000 for the first record. It was a solid first record with an option for a second, and it was $50,000. No tour support, no promo budget, no nothing. Just $50,000 for this record.
But
give
you
us
get
25 up front.
Right, but you get 25% of sales.
Yeah, I mean that's like Michael Jackson, Madonna.
Yeah, that's
if they're
great.
lucky.
That's great.
Royalty rate. So if we did the math based on what it cost going into making this record. We were like, if we sell a little over 30,000 copies, we're gonna fucking recoup. And then we start making 24 or whatever it was points on every record sold. So we knew, no matter the fucking name, whatever, if a song fails at radio, we might be able to sell 30,000 fucking copies.
Now, did he bring up changing the name, or he was okay with the name of the Fags?
Never once.
He was okay
Seymour
with it.
was cool with it. Seymour got it.
Okay. So we're on our way. We just signed a great record deal with Sire Records, home of the Replacements, home of the Ramones, home of
every
Blondie.
great band ever. The fucking Pretenders. I mean, so many fucking awesome bands. You know, the Dead Boys, right?
Yeah,
you know, like
exactly.
I mean, it was cool, and it was. So, do you remember when the Stooges got back together? And they did, they started doing shows when they first started, like doing shows when Ron Ashton was still alive.
Yeah, it was monstrous. It was huge.
So they did a homecoming gig at Pine Knob in Detroit, and Seymour came into town. That was the day of the fucking East Coast blackout, where all the power stations like across the grid shut down, and it shut down all of Detroit. I went and picked him up from his hotel adjacent to the airport, and by the time we got back to my place in the afternoon, all the power was out, gas stations were out, they couldn't pump gas. The power was out at his hotel when we picked him up, but we thought it would be on in a couple hours or something. He ended up stranded at my fucking house, and me and my roommate, it was like a party house. We had a bunch of people come over. We're sitting in the backyard with a little, fire and a little fire pit, and Seymour is just, telling people, music stories.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, he was fantastic, man. He was such a wonderful guy. He was so generous with his time and his experience, and it was awesome, but he was so hands-off in terms of the day-to-day at the label, and we ended up getting lost in the shuffle, and when they spun it off from Time Warner, when they spun off Warner Music and reorganized the label, we got dropped. And we didn't even know our record had been accepted. It was in the pipeline. We didn't have a solid release date, but they updated the website, and we weren't on the website anymore on the roster.
So wait a minute. So you record. So you record "Light 'Em Up." That's the record, right? That was "Light 'Em Up."
Right.
Seymour Stein's you're all gung ho. Seymour Stein, the guy who signed the Ramones, the guy who signed the Dead Boys, and so you record the album. You give the record label, you give them the tapes or whatever, and they say
it got mastered, everything.
And they say, "Wow, we love it. Everything sounds great. We're on our way. We're all going to be big boy. We're all going to be stars." And then. Do you keep calling them, or are they in touch with you, or what?
we were very hands-off. We left it to our manager. And guess who our manager was? Doogie Thompson, our former publisher at Warner Chappell. Doogie in Chicago had gotten into management. And we were dealing with 2 Chicago-based managers who were friends of ours that we kind of knew from the horse days. And they were at a level of success where they had to bring in other people to kind of help them. At one point, they were handling Alkaline Trio and us and blah, blah, blah. So Doogie and this other like heavy hitter in Chicago came in to kind of like help facilitate the bigger stuff. And Doogie was working with the guy who was managing Disturbed at the time, and they were huge. So, and Disturbed was a Warner artist. Doogie was handling, we were letting Doogie and our 2 like Chicago managers handle everything, and they just weren't getting any straight answers. Didn't want to rock the boat, but Doogie, I remember Doogie saying, or maybe it was Eric, our other manager, he's like, dude, fucking Doogie fucking manages goddamn Disturbed, and they're selling fucking like hotcakes, and he can't get a fucking phone call returned regarding you guys. So I don't know what the fuck's going on. Your guess is as good as mine.
Do you think Doogie's actually making phone calls on your behalf or not?
Yeah, I think, yeah, because, I mean, he had taken a soaking on our publishing deal. I think he was probably trying to like, make some money.
I wonder why the label would just suddenly lose interest in a band that they just signed a deal with. Maybe people change. Did people get fired or
Well, when it got reorganized, you know, like when we did our walkthrough with Sire Warner Brothers.
Yeah, those are always fun.
American Idiot was in the final art stages. So we walked through the art department, and they were like, you know, like down to 3 different treatments for the back cover of the record and this and that and blah, blah, blah. So they show us all the stuff. Green Day's first show in Detroit was in my old band's basement. And, you know, back when they were a 7-inch on Lookout Records. Right. And we're like, oh, that's really fucking cool, man. Like, you know, that's awesome that this record's about to come out. You know, that's cool. And they literally looked at us, and they're like, oh, it's fucking the worst thing in the world. It's like a rock opera. Nobody here wants anything to do with it, and nobody knows what to do with it.
Isn't that great?
And American Idiot turned out to be huge, but
exactly.
We were being told by their label that they didn't want to promote this thing. Like, who the fuck is going to put out a rock opera?
Yeah, and then when it's huge, oh, we were behind you from the start. We believed in you.
Exactly. But, you know, so we, you know, and that wasn't during our walkthrough.
Yeah.
But, you know, we were very, you know, like, we were kind of old hat at this point, so, like, people could be candid with us. You know, it was like, sure, oh, yeah, I understand. Well, good luck to them anyways kind of thing. Like, you know, okay.
But we're really behind you guys, the Fags.
And I think, honestly, I mean, God, I hate to fucking say this, because I hate getting asked this shit, and I hate reading it. Like, anything complimentary you ever read about our band that somebody writes, they, like, 90% of it comes with the, you know, the asterisk, the caveat, like, great band, awful fucking name. Or,
I never thought
or people that are like, I can't even get behind this band because that name sucks so bad. And it's like, fuck.
I never, back then when that album came out, it never crossed my mind that it was a bad name, really.
You know, I used to argue with the guys about it, but I got to a point where, like, I see their point. Like, I like the fact that it tweaks people's noses a little, because it's like, you know what? We are never going to be fucking rock stars. We are never going to sell a shit ton of records, whatever. So this separates a whole segment of schmucks. They're just off the table to begin with. And then it's like, can you get beyond a name? Because seriously, are you listening to music, or are you like tied into something else that I have no idea what the bearing is?
So how did you find out that the band was dropped?
Honest to God, they updated their website.
So you looked on their website and saw that your name wasn't on it? They didn't even make...
A friend of mine looked on the website because he was looking for information about when the fucking record was going to come out. It was a guy who lived out of, you know, didn't live in Detroit. And he goes, dude, I just looked at the website, and it looks like they updated it, and you guys aren't on the roster anymore. And I go, okay, whatever, like, let me check it out. And I get on the website, and I'm like, son of a bitch, he's right. So I call our fucking manager, I call Doogie, and he's like, hold on, mate, I'll get in touch with somebody and let you know what I find out, you know. And he calls back, he's like, yeah, mate, yeah, apparently you're not on the label anymore. You know, so it was like one of those things.
They weren't even going to tell you that you were dropped. You had to call them, and they said, "Oh yeah, you're dropped." By the way,
we were not high on their list of priorities. And then, okay, so we negotiated. They were really fucking cool, and I think Seymour had a fuck ton to do with that. And he had met Irv from Idol, you know, during this whole like wooing process, and Irv is a great dude too, and a huge fan of Seymour's, and had worked at Sony for years and years, so he had plenty of respect and contacts in the business. Seymour gave us our record back, and with a handshake deal that we would give him $1 per record sold once we recouped the costs of pressing it.
And well, that was not. So what were the costs of pressing it? Yeah, well, it probably didn't cost anything if Idol put it. So Idol Records ended up putting it out again, right?
Yeah, so we got it out, and because Irv's our bro, and he could throw it immediately into the pipeline and get it out as soon as possible. So we released it, but at this point, I had stopped drinking, and Jimmy and I were starting to butt heads so bad again. I told him our record release show was going to be my last gig.
Huh. So the record is finally coming out on Idol Records. Light 'em Up.
Yep.
And the band breaks up.
And at the same time, Jimmy and Tim, now, all right, at the time, I was like, this is the final fucking straw. Fuck you guys.
Why fuck them?
Now,
why fuck those guys?
In hindsight, they were so fucking smart and so right, but this is why I said fuck you guys. Okay, so now we get the record back. Irv's gonna put it out. Jimmy and I are arguing about fucking layout and artwork and this and that and blah 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 and blah blah blah, and I'm just getting pissed off. And then Jimmy and Tim were both like, we don't think we should be touring to promote this record. And I was like, you're fucking out of your mind. We have to go on the road and promote this. And they're like, no, man, there's smarter ways that are less exhausting and less expensive, and we don't have to be at each other's throats and blah, blah, blah. And at the time, I didn't understand, did not see, like, could not be on the same page. I was like, we have to go back out on the road and play this even if we hate each other. And they were like, no, man, there's got to be better ways of promoting this. And I was like, what are they? And I don't know, but let's get our heads together and figure it out. And I was like, fuck you guys, I'm done. You know, being around a bunch of drunks when I'm, like, fucking craving alcohol because I quit, and I'd, like, check myself into, like, a fucking, like alcohol rehab for, like, a week and a half kind of thing to dry out. Because I was on the road, and I wasn't eating, and I wasn't sleeping, and I was drinking too much, and we're arguing all the time, and it was just very stressful. I just thought they were so full of shit, and it's like, you guys, I've tried not to argue with you and tried not to be adversarial, like back in the old days with Horse, but, you know, I've let you guys kind of run the asylum. Fuck you. You know, I'm done. I'm putting my fucking foot down. And I left the fucking band. Now, okay, now in hindsight, they were absolutely fucking right. We were going to keep spinning our wheels and playing for 100, 150 fucking bucks a gig if we're lucky, driving and spending 130 to get there, and, you know, all of us sleeping in a fucking shitty motel and eating Taco Bell 1.5 times a day. We're going to be doing that indefinitely, trying to fucking, like, you know, to do what?
So who gets to break the news to the guy from Idol Records who just put your record out that you're no longer together?
Dude. Irv is one of our dear friends, and we were having conversations with him all the time. I mean, he's literally a friend.
So
where we would talk on the phone
he said,
times a week.
Okay, I'll put the record out. You're broken up. I guess I'm fucked. But he was
well,
okay.
No, he was like, dude, you got to do the fucking record release. Because I was like, fuck that. I'm done with these motherfuckers. He's like, at least play the record release. I was like, all right.
Right.
And he's like, will you do phone promo? And I was like, sure. So like, if you read the last couple like little blurbs that we got when that record came out, it was like, talking to John it's great to talk about the record, but unfortunately, he dropped a bombshell that they're not even going to fucking promote it. The last gig is in a couple weeks and blah, blah, blah,
Huh.
And we weren't friends for a while, and didn't hang around each other and purposely avoided each other. And then I ended up moving to Texas. I put together a band after the Fags, like after the dust kind of settled.
Was that the Hi-Fi Hand Grenades?
Yeah, and that band did a record at Dave, within a couple months, did a record at Dave Grohl's studio and went out on the road with the Foo Fighters and all this shit.
That's a good record, by the way.
Thank you. But I mean, it was happening so crazy and so fast. It was all like, I was just like a casual observer to what the hell was going on. Like, it was like, oh, okay, you want us to go tour with the Foo Fighters? Oh, we're gonna do another tour in Canada. Oh, we're gonna do a tour in Japan with them. Oh, we're playing Reading. Oh, we're playing Leeds. We're playing Pukkelpop. We're playing all these European festivals, and it was like all these great opportunities. But in almost all of them, like we never went over. Like we were continually like paying the dues, playing the like first slot on the main stage on Saturday morning and getting the fucking full on go grab your shine box from the monitor engineer in Austria.
This is the Hi-Fi Hand Grenades?
Right. Uh-huh. It was just the same thing over and over and over again. It was like, do you guys want to keep grinding it out for $150 a gig? Cuz that's what I mean in the Foo Fighters, when the Hi-Fi's opened up for the Foos all across Canada, I don't think we made more than $500 a show.
And all this time, all you dreamed about your whole life was being a musician.
And I never wanted to be a rock star. I never wanted to like sell a shit ton of records. I always kind of looked at it like a jazz musician kind of thing. Like I just wanted to be able to sell enough records to be able to like go in and record the next one.
Well, you did. You succeeded then.
Sorta, I guess.
So, Okay, so are you still living in Austin?
No, I moved back. I moved down to Texas. So the Hi-Fis start like, a few months after the Fags kind of break up, but just locally. And then within like 6 months, we're like off and doing stuff. And that takes up the better part of the next year and a half or whatever. And then that kind of peters out. And I go to work as a guitar tech, and I worked for Silver Sun Pickups, and I worked for Dropkick Murphys, and then I ended up working for Rancid. And at the same time, I moved down to Austin. The girl I was seeing at the time, we were living together, and she moved down there for work, and I was working as a guitar tech, so I could live anywhere. And I like, not having to deal with winter and awesome Mexican food all the time. So I was down there for about 6 years. I moved back to Detroit a little over 3 years ago.
And what made you want to get the Fags back together? How'd that come about?
When I was still living down in Austin, my best friend Chris was getting married up here, and I was the best man in his wedding, so I drove up. And I purposely allowed myself like an extra day or two after the wedding to hang around Detroit and see some friends. And my friend used to have this crazy annual backyard party barbecue right around Labor Day. And he did, and the side band that Vinny from Sponge and Jimmy Paluzzi play in, it's called the Orbitsons. They're kind of like a cowpunk sort of band. They've been playing together for a long time, and they were playing the party. And they played late, and my buddy that was throwing the party, his sister that throws a party with him, she was like our biggest friend and did like some art layout for us back in the day and all that. She was completely drunk, and she's like, John, you guys have to play a couple songs. She's like, Jim and Tim are here. And Tim was filling in on bass with the Orbitsons at this gig. So all three of us are in the same place for the first time in like however many years. Uh-huh. And we were all like polite and, hey, how's it going, man? Like kind of tentative but like friendly. And I was like, man, I'm drunk. Those guys are drunk. Like, we haven't played these songs in fucking years. I don't even think we remember them. And she's like, please. And I thought I could stave her off. I go, all right, I'll tell you what. You go talk to Tim and Jimmy, and if they say okay, then that's fine with me. And she's like, really? And I'm like, sure. So she walks away, and I'm like, there's no way in hell they're going to fucking be stoked to do this. And they had just finished their gig and, like, pulled their shit. It's like, like 1:10 and 1:15 in the morning, backyard party in Detroit with a loud band playing. And they had just pulled their shit off stage. And she comes back over and goes, they said okay. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. She's like, no. So we get on stage and, like, drunkenly attempt, like, 3.5 songs and embarrass the shit out of ourselves.
What songs were they? Do you remember?
I think we tried Siren Song and, like, we did Truly and maybe List.
Okay.
And we fucked up, like, Siren Song. We got through Truly and List. But it was bad, but it was fun, and we were, like, laughing because we're all fucking hammered. And then I get back to Austin a couple weeks later. I get an email from a guy back in Detroit that owns a club and we played a bunch of shows at back in the day, and he's like, what would it cost to get you guys to play a show? And I was like, it would cost a lot of money. And
really?
I told him, and he's like, I would pay that lot of money.
Really?
And I wrote Jimmy and Tim and said, hey, dude, so-and-so is willing to pay us blah, blah, blah. And I never heard back from him.
Huh.
So I didn't think about it. And then I come back. I moved back to Michigan, and I ended up seeing Jimmy quite a lot and Tim a little bit. And we're all super friendly, and I was doing a little bit of, like, solo stuff around town, just kind of, like, by myself, playing real mellow, kind of like Americana, like Jason Isbell-y thingy stuff that I was working on the side. And I end up seeing Jimmy and Tim at an Orbitson's gig, and we really were, like, connecting again, like, just having fun, hanging out, just hanging out.
Time heals all wounds.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm way more mellow, and I don't want to trip on those dudes anymore. I was a major problem in the band. It was like, I'm abrasive, I get stressed, blah 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 blah. So it was like super super mellow, like, just, hey man, good to see you, dude. No talk of music whatsoever. Then it was like the realization that, like, shit, this October is going to be 10 years since we put out Light 'Em Up. And I got in touch with the guys, and I said, would you guys be interested in just kind of doing, like, a one-off, like, play the record or something back at the, little club?
Was that offer still on the table from that dude?
Well, I was like, would you guys even be interested? And they were like, that might be cool. So then I talked to the dude, and he's like, I'll give you guys this much if you guys want to do it. And I was like, what do you guys think? And they're like, sounds great.
Was it good money?
So we did it. Yeah, it was decent. I mean, it was better money than we ever made when we were doing it.
Should we play Prices Right, or you want to tell me how much it was?
it was basically around $3,000.
Oh, that's
so we each got to walk away with $1,000.
Yeah, that's nice.
Whereas like, probably back in the day, I don't think we ever made more than $1,000 for a show in our hometown when we were headlining.
So you played. You had a reunion. Was the turnout well?
Yeah, it sold out in a small club. So, like, 200 people in there is about 20 more than it could really hold. So it was great, and it's a great PA, like way more PA than the room needs. So it sounded really good, and we're comfortable. We played 100 shows there, all our different other bands over the years.
So the reunion gig went well.
But it wasn't even the gig. It was the practices leading up to it. Like, we had so much fun just hanging out. Right. It was like the old days, like, because you play in bands, like when you get together and you just, like, drink beer and, like, hang out and play songs and fuck around as much as you actually play.
At this point in your life, when you get older, you get the attitude, I just want to play music that I like with people that I like.
Exactly. 100% on the nose.
So it was
just fun. And those guys both are married with kids. And, so for them, it was like an excuse to kind of get out of the house and, like, day drink, kill a 6-pack for a couple hours while we play songs that we can half remember.
And at what point do you say, hey, maybe we should try to do this again?
Well, I told him, because we were having so much fun. I said, you know what, you guys, if you guys want to play, continue to play with no pressure, absolutely no goal, nothing but just hanging out and playing when it suits us. I go, I'm super down. And they were both like, yeah, this is fun. You know, let's keep this open-ended. And then a major music writer here in town who does a lot of stuff that gets published in like national publications. He's an old school writer here, dear friend of ours. He asked us to play the local music awards last spring. And it's always been kind of a contentious thing with us. We're like, it's kind of a joke here. It's not like the Bammies, you know what I mean? It's more of a bunch of like schmucky bands kind of like patting each other on the back. So we always we're like, nah, we don't want to like have anything to do with it. But he's such a friend, and at this point we need any help we can get. He asked us if we'd play a couple songs at the awards ceremony, and we said sure. So we played 3 songs, and we had a lot of fun doing that. And then I was like, we need to do something else. But we just could not get together to get practice going because everybody was so busy doing other shit for a while. Tim's about to start work on the next Ted Nugent record. He's producing that.
Huh.
Blah,
really?
blah, blah. Yeah.
As we speak now, he's getting ready to produce the next Ted Nugent record.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah,
and I think he's
that?
done at least the last one, maybe the last couple.
Huh. How about that?
Tim's really good friends with Michael Lutz, who was in Brownsville Station.
Oh, very nice.
And Michael played bass in Ted's band, you know, like kind of around that like Little Miss Dangerous, Fred Bear era.
Right.
And Mike is a studio owner that is not too far from out where Tim's studio is. And when we were in the Fags, like I became good friends with Mike through Tim. He loaned us some guitars from his collection to like record the record with, and I got to come out to his studio, and he has a real 59 Les Paul, and he let me play it. He's such a nice guy. But yeah, like, so you know, Tim, you know, Mike's a producer as well, and like he loves Tim's stuff, and Tim and him have like traded tips and tricks and all that. So yeah. So we had all this like unreleased stuff. Because, you know, having Tim owning a studio, like anytime we had songs we were working on, if they got past the point of practice, it was like we should go in and cut a version, you know, just so we can hear it. And so we had a lot of recorded stuff, and so that record I'm With Her that we did through Pledgemusic a year ago, it was a bunch, like all the originals are stuff that we recorded back in the day that didn't make it to the record, or maybe like that song I ended up cribbing the bridge from, and it turned into another song that was on a record or whatever.
Okay, so the songs on I'm With Her, the originals that are on I'm With Her, are from back in the Light 'em Up days?
Yeah, well, all the days. It goes back to like, you know, like
from
the earliest days of Horace all the way up to the last.
Okay. All right.
So that's why all the production quality is different. You know, you can hear it's all different sessions.
Oh, they're already recorded from back in those days.
Oh yeah, and mixed, and man, half of those tunes we couldn't find them, and like some of the songs, like there's a version, the one that you put on your best of what was it, Holding Out?
Yeah, right.
On your best of albums podcast.
Yes.
That is not the right version of that song. I have I had a version, like we cut maybe 3 versions of that song.
But that's the one that came out on the Pledgemusic, though.
Correct.
Okay.
But the version that I really liked, the only copy we had was on like a fucked up, like scratched CDR.
So did you guys not think of re-recording them?
No, man. We didn't have the time. We didn't have the ability to. And I don't think those guys wanted to. You know, it was like, oh man, you know, like I don't want to like go back and like agonize over tunes that you know we had already worked on. But yeah, like the version of Holding Out, there was a way better version, but we couldn't find the tape from it.
So what about the covers that are on that album?
So we had these songs that are unreleased that were pretty good, like that song Stuck Like a Photograph. That was like a great tune that just didn't make it to the record, and I don't think we ever really played it live, you know, but it was one of those songs, it's gonna show up or something. We had all this stuff, and we're like, man, let's see if we can get some money raised so we can like put out a record and maybe we can like finish these songs. Or that was my idea, like we can re-record them or whatever. But the pledge drive didn't really go that well.
Oh, really?
And yeah, and it turns out that like the majority of the fundraising was the option that we offered to have us do a cover of your choice, and it was supposed to be videotaped.
Okay.
It was supposed to be a video clip of us doing the cover of your choice live in Tim's studio. But the song choices that kept coming in, I was like, we can't fucking pull that song off as a three-piece.
So what are some?
We're going to do Power Slave by Iron Maiden.
Okay.
Give me a fucking break.
Well, you did it.
So it became like in the idea of like, how do we even just try to pull this off? Well, we have to make it sound like it's our song or something, or at least try and bring it a little closer to what we do instead of like an honest cover band rendition of something.
Right.
Because I can't sing
You
like
kinda,
that.
You made all these covers your own.
We tried to. And in the process of like figuring out arrangements, we're like, well, all right, if I'm going to play this rhythm, we need to overdub, so then it turned into, all right, so I guess the covers are going to be actual recordings.
So you did make enough money to go into the studio and record these covers.
We made enough money through the purchase of the covers that we were able, once we lowered our bar for what we were trying to raise, we were trying to make 10 grand so we could do something that was like, let's go in and work on new songs and like unfinished songs and work on that. But we weren't raising any money that way. Like half of the, like we sold like 6 fucking covers or something.
Right.
I'm like, well, if we're going to record these songs, and Jimmy and Tim were like, well, then we should just put these on the record. And I'm like, really? And it's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, I thought we were going to work on some other stuff. It's like, well, they're not paying us to do that shit. They're buying these fucking covers, and that's taking up all the time to record. And at the same time, I didn't realize pledge music is like, hey, you set a thing, you have to have
if you don't get what
something released, So it was like kind of like, well, shit, I guess we got to put these covers on, otherwise we've only got half a record with the unreleased shit, So we did that. And I mean, it is what it is. We tried, and it's cool to hear it because I like the production, and it's neat to hear us like working on it. And if you listen to like Tomboy and Black Concert T-Shirt, some of those songs, if you didn't know they were covers, it's like, that's cool. That sounds like the Fags.
Well, hey, I was gonna say when I heard Black Concert T-Shirt from when I heard Watershed's version of Black, the original,
right?
I thought it was a Fag song. It sounds like a Fag song. So
when I played in the Generals way back in the day, the first show I ever did out of town, out of Detroit with the Generals, was a co-headline with Watershed.
It almost sounds like the Watersheds ripped you off.
Well, I became really tight with those guys.
Those guys
going
are
back
great,
to like
by the
91.
way. Great band.
And we kind of influenced each other a little bit. And through my connection with them, my friendship with them, they were languishing after having worked with a few different producers. They had a record deal with Epic back in the day. And I was like, you guys just need to work with a fucking good producer. I was like, let me introduce you to Tim. When they met Tim and Tim started working with them, Tim produced Watershed, a few of their records. That's when they started sounding really good. But at the same time, Tim's production value, I actually did some like tracking with those guys, like playing rhythm guitar tracks. Joe, the singer bassist, he and I, when the Fags were really butting heads, I was like, I think I'm going to kick Tim out of the band. Will you be our bassist? And he's like, no fucking way. And it's funny, too. Joe sings all the high harmony background vocals on the Fags Light 'Em Up record.
Oh, he does, huh? How about that? Does he know, I suppose he's heard Black Concert T-Shirt, right?
Yeah. Those guys, yeah. And Joe wrote that song. And Joe and I are good friends, and he published a book called Hitless Wonder about his experience.
I have it here in my hands. I have not read it yet, but somebody sent it to me.
It's really funny. It talks about like meeting me and the Generals, us doing shows together. I gave him a tattoo in the basement, drunk one night after a gig.
Yeah, I got a stack of books here. I haven't got to reading that one yet, but it's on my it's in a stack here, waiting to be read by me.
It's a fun book, you know. He gets a couple things wrong regarding me as far as timeline, but I don't give a fuck about that. I mean, it doesn't matter as far as the story.
There's great covers on the. You do a Ted Nugent cover, Motor City Madhouse, which is a good version. And the last song I was expecting, "Thank You," to be the Descendants cover, and that was a last minute purchase from somebody that purchased another cover. He's like, dude, I want to hear you guys do Rise Above, and that was like oh man, you know, I'm a huge Black Flag fan, but I would never play them in the Fags. You know what I mean? Right.
I didn't like. And Tim and Jimmy were like, how do you want to approach this? I was like, we just need to kind of cut it straightforward, and so we did it to honor the purchase from our friend that bought the song, but at the same time it was like, this really kind of like doesn't cohesively go with the record. So Tim was like, well, we'll just put it like, you know, like way buried, like a hidden thing. And I was like, that's cool.
6 minutes of silence and then 2 minutes of Rise Above, and you called it "Thank You." Was the title "Thank You" as a tribute to Descendants?
No, just thanks to the fans.
Oh, okay.
You know?
You've heard that song?
I mean,
have you heard that? Have you heard that?
Oh, yeah.
Great tune.
Stefan, the guitarist in the Descendants, shortly after I moved down to Austin, so this would have been around like 2009, 2010, he did a solo record, and he wrote every song with a specific singer in mind, and he asked me if I would do a song with him, and so he sent me some music and a melody, like a guitar melody for the vocal, and I wrote the lyrics. And he had a different singer on every track, and I ended up, the song I did with him opened his solo record.
Oh, really? I'm going to have to look for that.
It's really cool. It's fun because, like, the song he wrote for me to sing, he was like, I kind of heard it like it was like Motley Crue, like hair rock or something, hair metal. And I mean, I don't think it sounds that way. Basically the record sounds like, you know, an all record with different singers.
Yeah,
you know,
I'm gonna have to look for that.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. Stephen Edgerton, the 7 Degrees of Stephen Edgerton is the name of the record. It's pretty cool. And it was an honor because I mean, I'm a huge Descendants fan.
Me too.
And we played some shows over the years, like with All and the Descendants and whatnot, and I've become friendly with Stefan and Carl from the Descendants, but I wouldn't say that I'm like friends with them or anything, you know. But it's just like it's a mind blow, you know. Like I can't believe that like I'm pals with, and I got to do a song with a guy who like blew my fucking mind when I was in fucking 8th grade, 9th grade, you know.
Yeah, that Descendants All record is a masterpiece.
Yeah, and I got turned on to him during Enjoy. That's when that was a new record.
Me too.
And then All came out like a year and a half later or whatever it was, and it was like, holy fuck.
Yeah. We used to have a punk rock club in Jacksonville, Florida, and they played our club when that album just came out, and it was great.
Yeah, when I heard Clean Sheets.
Oh yeah, please.
And Coolidge.
Pep Talk.
It was like, fuck.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, with the stuff we do now, like with the Fags, like songs that I used to argue with Jimmy about, like you're playing it too slow. Back in the heyday, at the end of us grinding to a halt, Jimmy and I were fighting so bad, and it was so passive aggressive, and I used to bust his ass over tempos all the time because I could tell when he was dragging a tempo. He always wanted to slow things down. And that drove me nuts because I was nervous on stage, and so if I was doing a song slower, and you know how like you get adrenaline when you go on stage, so everything sounds slow in your head, you know, and you listen back to the fucking board tape, and it's like, Jesus Christ, we're on fucking meth, you know. But like I would bust his ass about, you know, in Horse. I'd be like, stop slowing these fucking songs down. I wrote them fast. That's where the impact is. And he's like, I'm playing it where I feel it. I'm like, I'm telling you to play it where I fucking wrote it. We would argue like that. In the Fags, it wasn't about, I want it to play faster. I'd be like, Jimmy, you got to stop dragging the tempo in this. And he's like, why? And I'm like, because you're killing my fucking breath. you're making me have to take a breath in a different spot in this line.
Right.
Because I'm having to hold the note just a little longer, and it's screwing me up. It's like throwing off my rhythm in terms, I'm like, I can tell that you're slowing the song down because I'm having to like take a breath and a pause in the phrase that's not natural. And he was like, you're full of shit. And Tim's like, actually, yeah, you're kind of dragging it in this part or that part. You know, we weren't trying to argue with each other, but we were naturally kind of like, ugh. And nowadays, with the Fags, when we practice, I'm like, I really like this a little slowed down. And Jimmy's like, well, I can play it faster. It's so funny. We've so like switched positions. I'm like, no, don't, man. I go, play it where you feel it.
So
you
now
know, like,
you're
it
practicing.
sounds good.
Now you're practicing on a regular basis with the Fags, and the Fags are back to being a real band.
We're not like on a regular basis. We practice because we have a show on the books at the end of the month.
Oh, okay.
But after that, we have a record to start working on because I got a new guitar right around Thanksgiving, and it was so inspiring. I started like accidentally coming up with a couple like riffs.
What kind of guitar?
And I was like, oh, that's a Flying V.
Very nice. Okay.
Yeah,
a Gibson
yeah,
Flying V.
like
Not an
nice
Ibanez, a Gibson Flying V.
Well, not a Gibson, a really, really high-end Japanese clone of a 58
what is
Carina V.
what's the brand of the Japanese? Because I have a Japanese clone of a Thunderbird. What is the brand?
All right, so I'm a super
Tesco?
duper guitar geek. I'm a super guitar geek, and the Japanese are so.
Oh yeah, they're well made.
I love Japan. You know exactly what I'm talking about.
What is the brand?
They make a better version. It's a Bacchus.
A Bacchus, okay.
So it's the only higher line would be like the Navigator series.
Yeah.
The Bacchus is, and this one I bought off a private collector in the States, and it's a custom order from the Bacchus factory from 2004.
Nice.
And it's just like the most ridiculous guitar. And I was like, I'm obsessed with like the original Carina V's. I've played a couple real ones, and I passed up some opportunities back in the day to get really nice like replicas. So I've always been on the hunt for one, and I couldn't really afford it, but I found one.
Are the Carina V's the ones that are stained yellow, or the natural wood tone?
It's the natural wood.
Yeah, they kind of round it off
sort
a little bit.
It's a light blonde, like a honey blonde, you know.
Yeah.
And they're different from the late '60s V's when they came back out with them. These are the ones that have. These are like the Albert King, Lonnie Mac V. It's the one with the strings through.
Yeah, they're a little bit rounded on a little bit. Instead of how some of the Flying V's are a little not box, but kind of come to a hard edge, have the binding. But the Carina, I think, are like more rounded.
It's a little different from like the 67s or 66 whatever V's when they came back out with them. Those have a different pick guard, they have a different neck joint, they have a different size to the headstock. There's a lot of differences to them. The original ones, I'm obsessed with them because it's like the closest Gibson solid bodies came to a Fender. It strings through like a Telecaster, and my two favorite guitars are like a 50s Flying V and an early 50s Fender Tele.
Okay.
They're just mean, and they can do they cover a lot of bases.
So
really cool guitars.
How many new songs do you have with the Fags now?
I was trying to kind of go through some stuff. Because some of this stuff is like old riffs that I never got anywhere with. Like I had a verse and half a chorus, and I wrote it 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and it just never got any further. This guitar kind of like made me start like revisiting some stuff, and I was like, oh man, this is cool, and it's kind of coming natural. And then I wrote a couple brand new songs, and I didn't want to like take away from our focus of like trying to just knock the rust off of like getting a set together for the show. But I was like, at the same time, I go, let me just run a couple riffs by you guys and see if you're interested in even like pursuing it further than that. So I played him a couple things, and Jimmy was like, oh yeah, I kind of hear where that could go this way or that way. And Tim starts laughing. He's like, just when I get back, when I make it out, they pull me back in. He's like making fun of Jimmy. And yeah, like, so both those guys were really adamant that, because I had already run it by Tim, I wanted to set up a little demo studio here at my house. My girlfriend and I bought a house in a decent neighborhood in Pontiac, and I've got an extra room, like my little music room where my stereo and my records are and whatnot. And I was like, I'd like to set up like a real small, like little demo studio, where I can kind of like get these ideas together where I can present them to you, and it's not just me like humming, here, right. Tim, play this bass line against me playing this rhythm, and Jimmy, can you play this kind of thing, and can you sing this here? I can actually just put together like a first draft demo of stuff. Their response to the song ideas I was running by them was, Jimmy was like, we got to get you set up with something at your house so you can start to get these down so we can hear them, and then we can come to practice or to the studio with like, okay, I was feeling this, like let's try this and blah, blah, blah. So that's where we're at right now. We're trying to get everything together to get this show out of the way, and then after that, it's get out to the studio and start working on like trying to cut some of these tunes.
Is this going to be
go ahead.
Are you at the point where you're thinking about a new release?
I want to put another record out, but I have no idea when that's going to come out. I don't imagine that we would put something out this year as far as a full length. What I would like to do is start working on songs, getting a couple songs to, like starting to cut some songs, and the strongest maybe 2 contenders, like maybe put out like a single or something. I have a friend who runs a label, Disconnected Records, and they put out the Crazy Squeeze and Telephone Lovers recently. I wonder if he'd be interested in putting out like a 7-inch or something, and I'm sure he'd do it. The only question is whether it's worth it to ask a label to spend money on a band that's not going to tour, number one. And then also, I think maybe if I ran that by Jimmy and Tim, their first question would be, why would we put it out on somebody else's label? Why don't we just put it out ourselves? But like a 7-inch is a money, it's a money pit. You're not going to make any money off putting out a 45. It's just the prestige of pressing vinyl. If you really want to make any money, just put out a 2-song CD, single.
So did you get shell shock by, or like turned off by Pledgemusic because it wasn't a great success?
I don't know. I mean, it was kind of weird. Like, I guess maybe in my head, just a little teeny bit, I thought when we started the project that we would have a little more success doing it. But it's not a negative thing. It's just the reality of, like, we have a very limited draw. Some of it may have something to do with the name. Some of it is we've just been off the fucking radar for so long.
I think I accidentally found out about the Pledge.
Right,
about it.
Right. It's hard nowadays with like so many bands and social media and algorithm, this and that. It's hard. Like, you can have a little buzz and it's hard to get in front of everybody's, media feed or whatever. It's a drop in the fucking ocean nowadays,
Yeah. Well, I like the latest record. I hope you'd put out another one because as you know, I'm a fan. So
I want to put out another one because this latest record was literally like an odds and sods thing.
Right.
The covers we had to include because that's what allowed us to actually press them. And the old stuff was what we wanted to put out, but we didn't get to rework it. We didn't get to, in some instances, we didn't even have the old mixes. We had to go buy a CDR version, because that was the only thing we had anymore. We couldn't find them because we recorded so much stuff that like a lot of those reels got re-recorded over. And we didn't realize, some other band that came into the studio ended up, re-recording over one of our earlier, reels of tape or whatever. So I want to work on another record because I'd actually like to do a record, like a new record that we, take some time on how it sounds and work on the arrangements and everything. And I think it'd be cool. And my dream, honestly, like pipe dream, would be that like we put a record out and it gets just enough buzz that we can go overseas and play a couple, like, you know, decent gigs, like invited to play like a festival or this or that, and that gets just enough like buzz to like maybe like, hey, we'd love to have you guys back next year, and we can work on another record.
Yeah.
I'd love to do like a handful of shows every year, when you know, if the other guys can get the time off and be away from families and obligations here, it would be so much fun. And the thing is overseas is our only hope with a name like the Fags of like even having anything more than like, you know, 100 people at a show.
Well, you know, at this point it's too late. You gotta keep the Fags name.
And the funny thing is, there's an active band in fucking in Europe called the Fags right now, a two-piece punk rock band. I think they're from like Austria or Germany.
It's too bad they're not a big band. Then you could sue them and get some money to record your next album.
We don't have the money to sue them. Nobody could put two nickels together right now, you know.
All right, we're at 2 hours here, so.
I'm sure. I can't imagine you want to include all this stuff.
I'm actually
You're great. I like your editing. You know,
I don't edit. There's no editing. So,
really?
So I'm going to put a song at the beginning and a song at the end of this thing. I was thinking, so I'm going to let you pick the beginning and end songs. So let me get a pen here. You want to make a choice? You could pick anything. Maybe even, I was thinking, let me find a pen here. I was thinking Stupid from the Hi-Fi Hand Grenades is one of the tunes, but I'm going to let you pick two. I
love that song. And we actually talked about like trying to do it in the set, but I think those guys are just a little hesitant right now, although I think they like the song. But I think the way I told them was this would have been a Fag song if we had stayed together, you know, if we were together when I had written it, you know. I would have brought this to you guys.
Well, why don't you pick the opening song and the closing song, so there'll be your playlist here.
Jesus. Let me see. Is Snap on Light 'Em Up here? Yeah, it is. Okay. First song, track 10 off Light 'Em Up, Snap.
Okay.
Because that's a song I wrote to Jimmy and Tim when we kind of like gelled as this is going to be a band.
All right.
And the song is literally like an apology, sort of. Like the lyrics is like, take this one, you know, take it once more from the top. Let's try to get it right. I don't care if it takes us all night. I just want to hear it sound like the song that's in my head. Something we can look back on when we're gone. Or something to look back on when we're gone. Not to say we're going somewhere. You know, I've heard that one before. And it was literally like, all right, let's try and, you know, like, I'm just really, really grateful that we're playing together, and that was written in the initial days of the Fags. So I think I want to open with that when we play at the end of the month, because it's a good song. It's kind of near and dear to my heart, and especially because I'm grateful to play with these guys again.
All right, and what's going to be the closing song of the episode?
I don't know. If you want to do Stupid, that's cool.
All right.
Maybe I can. You know, I would love to see that. Get a little more life, because the hi-fis were so limited in what we were able to do. And we've actually been practicing a couple of the more poppy horse songs for this show, possibly to include the set. Because, you know, basically when the Fags started, it was going to be like the material initially was going to be the second horse record that was going to be, then it was going to be my solo record, and then it turned into the Fags. So
all right.
I told those guys too. I was like, man, you know, we've got songs that Tim produced, you and I played on. They're part of our canon if you want, you know, and they're not going to get played otherwise. So,
and if anybody happens to be listening to the show and is in the Detroit area, where's the gig?
It's Friday, February 23rd at the Magic Bag in Ferndale, Michigan, which is just north of the Detroit border. Central, southeastern Michigan, Oakland County, and it's a great it's a great bar venue. If you look on YouTube, there's a 4-part video of us playing live at the Magic Bag back in the day, and it was like us in our heyday, like at our peak live. and so this is our first time playing it since probably that show. You know,
Right.
whenever it was, 2004, I don't know. But yeah, hopefully we do all right, and we've got a cool band opening up for us, Devious Ones. They're weirdos and friends of ours from many years ago. So.
All right, John Speck, thanks so much for doing this. It was a good little talk for 2
Michael,
hours.
thank you so much, and I hope I didn't make your ear fall off talking to you, but I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you guys, you know, even knowing us and appreciating, and I'm a fan of yours as well, and
Right.
yeah,
All right.
thank you so much, man.
All right, thanks, man. I appreciate it. Good luck with the gig, and I will be watching, friend. Keep in touch.
You too, brother.
All right, talk to you later.
Have a good one, man.
All right, there you go. The great John Speck from the Fags. That was a good talk. All right, as requested, well, I kind of requested it, but we're going to close out with a song from his other band, from the band he did after the Fags, Hi-Fi Hand Grenades, called Stupid. Thank you so much for listening, friends. I hope you enjoyed this 2-hour episode. Thank you for the donations. I will thank everybody personally on the next episode, but this episode, you know who you are, friends. Without your donations, this show would die a horrible, putrid, stench-filled, getting dropped by Sire Records kind of death. All right. We'll talk to you very soon. Here's how you can reach me. You can find the show at rockandrollgeek.com, rockandrollgeek@gmail.com. Let John Speck know on Facebook or however that you heard him on the Rock and Roll Geek Show so he doesn't think he wasted 2 hours of his time doing this conversation. And find me on the Facebook, R&R Geek. Find me on the Twitter, R&R Geek. Find me on the Instagram, Rock and Roll Geek. Don't ask. Here is the Hi-Fi Hand Grenade, Stupid. We will talk to you very soon, friends.
A valentine for misforsaken. A poetry, bad poetry, poetry, it's bad poetry, it's pointless bleeding, so sad to say, so sad, so sorry, stupid, stupid poetry, pointless bleeding, so sad to say, so sad, so sorry, stupid, stupid, stupid.
It's a rock and roll geek train wreck.